decided that the whole concept of sharing is dead. And I arrived at this conclusion after conducting an extensive Google search on the word sharing. I used several configurations to look for stories or ideas about sharing. So I typed in things like the importance of sharing or the psychology of sharing. And the results turned up some very interesting articles. Sharing, according to Google, so it must be true, it's really just something we do on social media. Like on Facebook, we share links, we share stories, we share status updates. Sharing, according to Google, is all about sharing information. It's Google, right? I mean, that's their bit, that's their niche. Sure, it can be information about our lives, but in truth, today's idea of sharing is all about me. It's all about sharing my thoughts. It's about sharing my reading habits. It's about sharing pictures of my food. Or my dog. Or anything else mildly interesting that crosses my path. Sharing, according to the dictionary, is the act of dividing up shares or allowing others to use, enjoy, or experience jointly or in turns. That's the kind of sharing you learn in kindergarten. But the kind of sharing I want to explore this morning is how we allow others to be part of our joy, a part of our abundance, and a part of our lives. Real holy sharing, it requires us to give parts of ourselves away to others. Divide up these shares so they can use, enjoy, or experience them jointly or in turns. We're allowing others to be part of what we already have and enjoy. Sharing requires relationship. It requires vulnerability and sacrifice and the ability to take joy in seeing another person enjoy the things we're already enjoying. To think we're really sharing when we're just sharing information on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, it's to miss the point of sharing altogether. That kind of sharing is like spiritual junk food. It tastes good, but you're hungry again in an hour, right? Real sharing, it calls on us to give more than just surface information. It invites us to step out of our own selfishness, our own self-centeredness, and give of ourselves and share the presence of the holy that is within us with others. In our Hebrew scriptures this morning, we read about David. He brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. It may not be obvious, but this story really is an act of sharing. By bringing the Ark to the people, he's literally sharing the presence of God. Now, despite what you may have learned about the Ark of the Covenant from the Indiana Jones movies, it is not a weapon. It will not melt you, no. It might melt your ego, which is a pretty good thing, but no. Instead, it held the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, and to the Hebrew people, that is what symbolized the presence of God. This was in a time before the temple for God had been built in Jerusalem. God didn't have any sort of set home at this point. Instead, God was seen as nomadic. Wherever the ark went, that's where God was. And I often think we've done God a disservice by building church-shaped God cages for her. I mean, because now we feel like we have to go somewhere special to experience the holy and share in that joy of the holy. But I think David and his merry band had it right. God isn't meant to be caged or put on display. Instead, we should have a free-range God. One that goes wherever we go. Because we carry the Ark of the Covenant with us wherever we go, and we call it our bodies. Wherever we are, there is God. And real sharing means that we are sharing the presence of the holy with everyone we meet. A Course in Miracles says our bodies are how we communicate. It's how we communicate with the holy, and it's how we communicate the love of the holy out in the world. And this kind of sharing, I think, is what David experienced, because it produced such deep joy in him that he danced and he sang. He was so overjoyed because he was sharing in the presence of God that he literally stripped down to a thong and danced nearly naked in the streets. That's what the scriptures say, much to the disapproval of Saul's daughter, Michal. Yes. This, jubilance, is what real sharing is about. When we so fully give of the holy within ourselves that we are just overcome by the joy of it all. We may even want to strip half naked and dance in the street because it just feels so good to share, to feel that presence of the holy in, through, and around us all, at all times. It's rare, though, and maybe, for indecency purposes, maybe it's probably good that it's rare for us to be like David, moved to dance at the thought of sharing our joy or literally sharing our food with everyone. Instead, we're more like the character Michal, who sees such a joyous display of sharing as offensive. That's because as human beings, we can be very selfish. We've been taught that. But we need to unlearn that. We need to learn how to unearth our original blessing of our innate want and need and desire to share with others. This is where wonder can be valuable, because when we enter this state of wonder about sharing, we can see how joyous it is to be like the universe that created us and gives everything without ever asking for anything in return. But to learn the art of sharing, we humans, we learn best from each other. We got to have role models. As children, we're impressionable, and if those we love, like our parents, show us that it's always more fun to share with everyone, then we're more likely to give it a try. But if we never see it modeled, if we grow up in a selfish home or environment, we tend to remain selfish. When it comes to sharing, it really is a case of monkey see, monkey do. We want to model our behavior on those we admire, whether they're people who share or not. So David serves as a model of sharing as he opens himself to the presence of the holy, and he dances with delight when he shares God and food with the people. In the end, all that food is shared, according to the scriptures. But that's not what satisfies the people. Instead, it is that simple act of sharing, that being in the presence of the holy together and being willing to receive, that causes them all to want to dance. Breathe deeply. In our Jesus story, we find our guy right on the verge of creating one of his most memorable miracles, the feeding of the 5,000. And Jesus and his guys were just trying to get away from it all for a little while. They had been busy doing their teaching and healing thing, and they hadn't even had a chance to grab a bite to eat. And as soon as they got out of the boat, though, they were besieged by this crowd who expected them to keep going. More teaching, more healing. Jesus, though he was hungry and tired at this point, was said to have compassion on the people who gathered. And we dare not skip over this word too lightly in this passage, because it's really key to the whole story. Without compassion, which literally means to suffer with, compassio, to suffer with, without compassion, sharing would be impossible. Without compassion, it would never occur to us to share in the first place. Without compassion, we are selfish, because we can't put ourselves in the place of another human being. We are unable to feel their suffering. And if we can't feel the suffering of another, we will never be moved to share with them. So after having compassion on the crowd, to be moved to share with them and put aside his own hunger, Jesus shares himself with the crowd. He shares his message of love and compassion, and he shares his ability to heal people in mind and body and spirit. And then things get interesting, because, you can only go so long without eating. Even though you may be enjoying what you're doing, you're going to get a little hangry. Like those Snickers commercials tell us. You can become that demanding diva when you start to really get the munchies. So this crowd and the disciples, they were no different. Things were dragging on. Their hunger was overcoming them. And the disciples said, "Yo, Jesus, you might want to shoo these people off so we can have a bite to eat. Let them go and find some dinner for themselves, and if they want to come back after they're full, that's great. If not, we get some rest," right? But this is where the lesson on sharing really begins. Instead of telling the crowd to go away, Jesus said to his disciples, "You give them something to eat." And that's not what the disciples were expecting. And they were probably wondering if Jesus had lost his ever-loving mind. "We don't have the money for that," they protested. Jesus says, "Well, what do you got?" 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, they said, looking pretty worried that they're going to miss their own dinner right now. "And we got this, and we ain't giving it away. That's ours." "Hand it out," Jesus says. "Share what you have." Right about now, I know what you're thinking, because I've spent just about every meditation over the past 11 years debunking miracles and reading scriptures different from the traditional reading. But you know what? I believe that this event was truly a miracle. But maybe not in the traditional way. I think it was a miracle of sharing, where the disciples and everybody else learned that it's always more fun to share with everyone. Remember what I said earlier, to learn sharing, we got to see it modeled. Perhaps, just perhaps, as the disciples made their way through the crowd distributing their little meager dinner, maybe others had some stuff stashed away too. You know, maybe they thought, maybe this is a picnic. They remembered their own original blessing of sharing. Because they may have had a little bit of food, but they were hoarding it too. When are we going to get a dinner break? Don't let anybody see your food. But as those disciples walked around with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, everybody else saw sharing, generosity being modeled, and they began to unlearn what the selfish society had taught them, and they began to share with others around them. They had just been treated with compassion by Jesus. Jesus knew their own suffering, and now they were seeing his followers give generously from their small stash, and they were inspired to do the same. Just like Jesus, they felt the suffering of those around them. They were moved by compassion. They remembered that they were really hardwired to share, and so they began to share. And everyone was fed, and they have 12 baskets of leftovers afterwards. I'm not doing anything new here. This interpretation isn't brand new, and it tends to piss people off who really want a mystical, supernatural miracle to take place in this setting. I get it. We want to believe that God's just going to step in and fulfill all of our needs. We want to believe it's not up to us to feed the world. It's not up to us to meet the needs of our neighbor. Instead, we often see this miracle story's lesson as, stand back, rely on God to work all the miracles. If we can do it ourselves, we reason, why do we even need God? My question is this, though. Why is it any less of a miracle for people to share with one another? Why is that any less miraculous than food appearing out of thin air? I believe it's fairly impressive that a group of 5,000 tired, sweaty, cranky, and hungry people would be so overwhelmed for compassion with one another to be able to suffer with one another in that moment that they shared everything they had with those around them. Given that we are convinced that human nature is callous and selfish, I think the sight of 5,000 people sharing their food is far more miraculous than God just supernaturally saying, poof, lots of food. I think this crowd learned what A Course in Miracles teaches. Nothing real can be increased except by sharing. That's why God created us, the Course says, to share whatever we have. Sharing, according to the Course, is what creation means. How, what, and to whom are irrelevant. Doesn't matter who you share, how you share, what you share, because real creation, it says, gives everything, since it can create only like itself. Remember that in the realm of God, there is no difference between having and being, as there is in existence. In the state of being, the mind gives everything always. Maybe this crowd realized that having food was less important than being generous, and in their embodiment of generosity, everybody gets fed. There's plenty to spare. Maybe the crowd and the disciples learned what Jesus meant when he said, you give them something to eat. These are not empty words. Jesus is telling his disciples and us that we have the power to feed one another. We have the power to share, to come together, to work cooperatively in this world to bring about the end of separation. This goes hand in hand with Jesus' assertion that the realm of God is already here. Separation is already healed. It's here when we set aside our selfish feelings and learn how to share. The realm of God appears when we learn the true meaning of sharing, when we open ourselves to one another, when we become vulnerable with each other, when we share even though we may run the risk of lacking what we think we need if we give it away to other people. But here's where the real mind-boggling, out-of-this-world miracle occurs. The more we give, the more we get. The people gave what they had, and they collected a bumper crop of leftovers. The giving just kept on going. Nobody lacked for anything. The food, the compassion, the sharing, the miracles, they just kept multiplying because this crowd deeply learned the lesson of sharing. Love is only something if you give it away, as the song says. And when we hoard it, when we lock it away, when we keep it just for ourselves, it dies. We lack for everything when we selfishly hoard our food or our money or our time or our space. Jubilants, how would it change the way you lived if you realize that the only way any of us gets fed in this world is by sharing, not just by sharing food, but by sharing resources like clean air, clean water, technology, anything else we may just want to keep for ourselves. Jubilants, how would it change the way you lived if you truly understood Jesus when he said, you give them something to eat? We shy away from fulfilling that commandment because we think we have nothing to give or so little to give. That's the way the disciples felt. We can only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. What you going to do with that? What makes sharing a miracle, Jubilants, is that we are willing to believe that we, like the universe, because we are the universe, we have the capacity to share everything because everything is ours. There's no lack in the realm of God. Yes, if you share a limited resource, you might have less of it. But when you share your unlimited resource of love, it never runs out. In fact, it multiplies, it expands, it grows in the giving, and there is a bumper crop of leftovers that ensures the sharing just keeps going on and on and on and on. You've seen the shampoo commercial, and they tell 2 friends and so on into infinity. We all have beautiful hair. Some of us, anyway. Sorry, y'all. No matter what it is you think you have, whether you think you have a little or a lot, this is Jesus' message. You've got it to give. Give wastefully. Give joyfully. Dance half naked while you do it if you want, because when we learn how to share with holy abandon, we will soon realize it's not just a miracle. It really is the only way to live. Oh, yeah.